ਅੱਜ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਸ਼ਾਨ ਫਰੇਜ਼ਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਅਤੇ ਕਈ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਨੇ, ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ 5 ਲੱਖ ਨਵੇਂ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਲਿਆਉਣ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਯੋਜਨਾ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਏਗੀ। ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਹਨ। ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਵੈਲਕਮ।
It's great to be back. Sat Sri Akal to you and your audience.
Sat Sri Akal, thank you very much. Minister, you're planning to bring 500,000 new immigrants approximately here by 2025. So how are we going to accommodate them? Do you really understand the magnitude of these numbers? We have no infrastructure, the housing, the medical facilities. We are already stretched.
So, look, let me explain just how important it is that we consider the absorptive capacity, which you're really delving in on. But before I do, let's understand that there is an enormous cost not to bringing enough newcomers to Canada. You go down Main Street of any community in Canada these days, and you're going to see a help wanted sign in the window because businesses can't get the workers that they need. After the pandemic, we've seen the economy open up. But businesses are struggling because they can't get access to labor. If those businesses close down, the conversations that we're going to be having won't be about whether we can build houses quickly enough. It'll be about whether we can afford to operate schools and hospitals. We have an aging population and a labor shortage, and that demands that we increase immigration numbers. But it demands that we do it in a thoughtful way. One of the features of our immigration levels plan is to leverage a new tool that's going to help us select newcomers that have the skills to build more houses. We also have an element to our plan that's going to attract people to parts of the country that have access to housing, that have access to healthcare services. We've expanded, for example, the Atlantic immigration program so more people can come to the Atlantic region. We've expanded the rural and northern immigration program and the provincial nominee programs so we can push people to parts of the country that have a greater capacity to absorb them. The answer to our housing challenges is not to stop being welcoming towards newcomers, it's to build more houses, and our immigration levels plan is going to help us achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Another thing is that you promised in the beginning of this year, in January, to abolish and to finish the backlog, but the backlog is still there. We're almost done with this year. Are you setting up some new timelines?
We're on track to have some really serious milestones reached, but let me be more specific to let you know exactly where we stand right now. In addition to the pandemic-related challenges and the effort in Afghanistan, we've had additional pressure from Ukraine to respond to do what we believed was the right thing. And despite these enormous challenges, we are now back on track for the 6-month standard for express entry files that are applied for today, and we've been that way since July. For family reunification, we are back to a 12-month standard. When it comes to work permits, we're expecting right around the end of this year, maybe very early in the next year, that work permits will be back to a 60-day standard. We've already achieved the 60-day standard for new applications out of the United States and India. We're going to also, when it comes to be back to study permits, later this fall, back to the service standard we enjoyed before the pandemic. The temporary residence visas will be a little bit longer into next year, but most of the service standards that we enjoyed before the pandemic will be back in place around the end of this year, if not sooner. There may be a few exceptions, but we'll be pretty well on track. It's really important to understand the difference, though, between getting back to the timelines and having no applications in our inventory. Of course, we're seeing a record number of people want to move to Canada, want to come visit Canada, and that's a good thing. There will always be cases in the immigration system. That number will never be zero. But what's important is that we can reliably and predictably give people timelines that they can expect. And across our different streams to come to Canada, we're making excellent progress as a result of investments we've made and changes to policies we've adopted in recent months.
No, that's fine. Well, last time you came to Vancouver, you mentioned that you have hired 1,250 employees more to clear that backlog. So we are in November. Would you clear that backlog by the end of this year?
So what's really important to understand is when you're talking about clearing the backlog, that does not mean that we get to a spot where there are 0 cases in the inventory. That would be a very bad thing because that would mean nobody is applying to come to Canada. What we've seen recently is a decrease in the number of cases in the inventory in the range of 200,000 fewer cases that are there today as compared to a couple of months ago. When we made those announcements in August in Vancouver about hiring 1,250 more staff, most of whom have since been hired, what our goal was to accomplish was to make sure that we could get back to our standard processing times, not to make sure there are zero cases in the immigration inventory in Canada. As a result of those hires and different policies that we've adopted and new technology we're leveraging, we're very close to being back to that service standard, which is what the goal has been and remains to be today. So my mandate letter requires me to establish a pathway to permanent residency for certain temporary foreign workers and international students. In addition to the measures that we're working on, and we will make good on that mandate letter commitment, we're also leveraging existing tools that were outlined in our response to my colleague Randeep Sarai's private members motion to get more people to come through the ordinary channels that will allow more people who are here temporarily to transition to permanent residency. I've said from the beginning that the solution won't look exactly like the TR to PR program that was implemented during the pandemic to meet the needs of a very specific moment in time. But what we're seeing is an increasing number of people every year who are becoming permanent residents that have already been here. We're seeing, for example, last year, 157,000 new permanent residents got their start in Canada as international students. We're seeing people use the international student program as a stepping stone towards permanent residency. We have some policy work that we need to do to make that process easier. We have some opportunities to continue to look at draws under our express entry system for people who have experience here in Canada and may have an existing job offer waiting for them. There's different tools we're looking at leveraging to make it a smoother pathway for people, in addition to working to establish a cleaner pathway to permanent residency, specifically for temporary foreign workers and international students.
And Minister, time and again, we brought to your attention and to the attention of your previous ministers also, that there is still a lot of LMIAs being sold in black market from $40,000 to $50,000 a piece, and that's exploitation. So are you going to change the structure in any way so this exploitation can be ended?
So the government is working very hard towards addressing this issue. I want to be a little bit careful because although it touches on our immigration stream, my department is not responsible for administration of the temporary foreign worker program. So when you say, am I going to do this? I'm going to work with my colleagues at ESDC and Minister Qualtrough, who runs the temporary foreign worker program, to help eradicate this problem. It is very serious. We need to continue to boost resources for enforcement to make sure workers are treated fairly, but also that people are not essentially committing fraud by taking out an LMIA in order to sell it at a profit to someone else. That was never the intention of the LMIA process. We've been actually trying to reform the LMIA process to make it easier for employers to access, so they won't have the need to seek opportunities to purchase an LMIA on the black market. This is something we need to do by making it easier for people to take part in the process legitimately and to crack down on bad actors by continuing to invest in enforcement on the other side of the equation.
And also, Minister, what are the new NOC categories included in the Express Entry program?
So for those who aren't familiar, the Express Entry program is an economic stream that allows us to select newcomers who will make a meaningful difference to the Canadian economy. Today, we announced the implementation of new changes to what used to be called the National Occupation Classification, which is a fancy way of saying which industries are able to take part in the Express Entry system. We're moving away from the National Occupation Classification to a new system that's based on a person's training, education, experience, or the responsibilities that they're going to have when they get into Canada. The new plan will add 16 different sectors that will be eligible to take part in the Express Entry system to come to Canada as a newcomer. The kinds of industries that will benefit range from chefs to heavy equipment operators, to trucking and transportation, to nurses' aides and orderlies, to teachers' assistants, to estheticians, and many more. The reality is this is going to open up Canada's immigration system to a number of professions that may not have historically been viewed as high skilled, but we have come to understand are essential to the functioning of our economy and are suffering from labor shortages like many other sectors in Canada. This is going to make a meaningful difference for the Canadian economy, and in particular for the sectors that are now eligible to take part in this new immigration pathway to come to Canada.
Minister, your friend and our MP, Randeep Sarai, told me that you are bringing back the TR to PR or a similar program. Are you going to set up another different kind of program now for that?
Well, we're working on that now in terms of the pathway I described earlier to permanent residency for both temporary foreign workers and international students. In addition to that, we're looking to see what we can do to focus on the existing pathways for people who are here now that would like to transition. And although it's easier for people to understand when you create a new, very specific pathway specifically for TR to PR, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to get the most number of people here as permanent residents who may already be here temporarily. If you look, for example, at the measures that we put in place, we're trying to make it easier for people who are already here to stay here. Look at what we did with the extension of postgraduate work permits, which is allowing 93,000 people who are about to have their work permit expire or had recently expired to stay in Canada for an additional period of time so they can qualify for a future express entry draw. I know that we've been considering when we're going to be able to revisit the selection of the Canadian Experience class through the express entry system, and we're continuing to look at how we can adjust our express entry system to better reflect the experience that people have when they're working in Canada, making a meaningful contribution to our communities already. There is no, in my opinion, there is no one single policy that will make the issue of transitioning to permanent residency for temporary residents a perfect pathway, but by leveraging the existing pathways that we have and continuing our work to implement a new pathway to permanent residency for temporary foreign workers and international students, we can help thousands, tens of thousands of people make their way to Canada who currently are having a hard time figuring out what their pathway may look like. There's policy work that's underway. I'm constantly in contact with Randeep Sarai, who is an extraordinary advocate to resettle people permanently who are already here temporarily. And I'm going to continue my work with my friend and colleague Randy until we can make good on our commitment that's outlined in my mandate letter to establish that pathway.
And also, Minister, in the light of your statement that white tsunami is coming, we need more workers, we have plenty of people here on work permits, students, healthy young people, know English. Is there any chances of a general amnesty for those people?
So there's two separate issues that you've just raised. There are plenty of people in Canada, but there are far more people who are already working in a job, 400,000 more people today than compared to the beginning of the pandemic, and we still have a massive labor shortage. So in addition to the people who are here, we need to bring additional newcomers to make the most of the economic opportunity before us and to combat against the troubling demographic trajectory of an aging population. The question that you've asked around a pathway to permanent residency for other people who may be here pertains specifically to the issue around undocumented workers. We have, in my mandate letter, an additional commitment to expand on some of the initiatives that we've learned from previously. I'm thinking of the Guardian Angels program that allowed frontline healthcare workers a pathway to permanent residency during the pandemic. I'm thinking of the pilot that we've run in Toronto and Hamilton for out-of-status construction workers. We're looking now to figure out what we can do to provide a pathway to permanent residency for additional populations that do not currently have status in Canada. And by and large, a lot of these people are living here, have housing already, but are not able to work at their full potential because they're living and working in the shadows. If we give them the opportunity to pursue legitimate employment, they'll be paying taxes, they'll be able to seek better paying jobs, and continue to make a contribution to our communities. We have a lot of work to do to understand how to implement a policy of this kind that will be successful, not just splashy in the news. And we're working very hard to iron out some of the details so we can provide a pathway to those people who are here and making a contribution so they no longer need to live in the shadows and can better contribute to our communities.
Is there anything else you'd like to say in closing to our listeners?
Look, it's a pleasure, as always, to join you to talk about immigration. I know it's a massive priority for the community. I've had the opportunity to engage not just on the immigration levels plan or on the recent changes to the NOP codes, but we're listening to the community. We don't make decisions in isolation in Ottawa. We listen to international students who've told us that they want to be able to better support themselves by working more. We listen to people who want their families to be able to come more quickly and make investments in processing to turn that into a reality. We listen to people who want to be with their parents and grandparents and make changes to the super visa program, in addition to increasing the allotment on our levels plan for that stream. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to engage. It's by conversing with the community that we can better identify strategic priorities for Canada, and people who want to give input will always have an opportunity, and know that the minister is listening. And I hope we can continue to work together to share information about the exciting immigration changes we make through your channel. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to connect.
Minister Fraser, thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure as always. Take care.